Welcome to Portals of Perception. Our propelling inquiry centers on how we humans transform at the edge of discovery, where we skate to the end of what we know and look beyond to discover ourselves anew. Today, we are seeking to appreciate the poetry of transformation. What is it? What is poetic about transformation? What is it about life that and how life transforms itself that's poetic? So I'm going to ask my two guests to first introduce yourselves.
Well, hello, Aviv and Holly. It's so great to be here with you all today. I'll jump in here because I'm thinking about portals and perception, and that reminds me of William Blake. I don't know if you were thinking about that when you were thinking about the poetry of transformation, but by way of introduction, I'm Libby Wagner. I used to say that I had a house in Seattle because I traveled all the time, but now I actually live here, especially in the past pandemic year, and love the mountains and the rivers of the Pacific Northwest. My friend Owen O'Sullivan, the Irish musician, when he introduces me, says, here's my friend Libby. She's a poet with a little consulting business on the side, which always makes me laugh because that's the way he sees the world. And that is actually true. I work with organizations to help them change their language and their culture and their leadership. But I walk in the world as a poet. And when I think about your question about the transformational elements of poetry or the poetry of transformation, I think because for me, I go back to what Donald Hall said, poetry was saying the unsayable. And when you were introducing, going to the edge of what we see, the edge of what we know, I think just by nature, poetry invites us into that process. How can we say something that actually is beyond language? And myself and other poets I know, we're crazy enough to try. We're crazy enough to try to say it.
Well, I would agree with everything you just said, Libby, about that crazy enough to try and that poetry at the edge there. I'm Holly Thomas, and I'm a freelance editor with a background in technical editing. And before that, my first life was as a land use and environmental planner. But for the last several years, I've been freelancing it. And so I've been working with all kinds of clients who are trying to tell their stories, or businesses that are reshaping their websites and trying to get the message just right. And it's a fascinating way to engage with people, because it's like, well, are you saying what you mean? And if you think you're saying what you mean, is it how other people will hear it? So it's like a constant mirror in my own process of creativity. I live on Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest. Have lived here for many years now, and it's a blessed place to just keep exploring what you said about the Pacific Northwest and the environment of the Pacific Northwest. I have a family of deer that comes through my yard multiple times a day. Today they were just mowing down my landscaping once again, and I've given up all. It's like, have at it, folks. It's a buffet. Enjoy it. But there was something you said in one of your pieces, Libby, as I was researching you a little bit, because we haven't met before, about noticing. And for me, the what comes up for me in this question of what is the poetry of transformation, or what arises with that, there's something about that edge and noticing, the capacity to notice, and then this crazy impulse to try to capture it, and not capture it as in to trap it, but to try to capture it in a way as to convey it. That's what arises for me, is like that fascination, and then wanting. It's not just a fascination, it's a sense that in noticing something, there's energy coming in, there's light, there's coming in, there's a message coming in, there's something coming in that wants to come through this and be released out into the world in some fresh way, or maybe just be released into me and transform me. But then there's this impulse to write it down so that I can share it with someone else.
So all three of us, we are, geographically speaking, based in the Pacific Northwest, which is one of the most poetic places on this planet, beautiful planet, in terms of the everything that nature offers here. And we seem to, the three of us, have a fascination with this membrane of the here and now and what's beyond. And you both are describing poetry as one of the bridges from the unmanifested to the manifest realm. And so let me ask first, before we go deeper into what is transformation and what is transformational, just stay a little longer with this idea of poetry and poetic. And let me ask, how and where do you find access to the sense that this world and all that's around us in the theater of life, that poetry is always latent everywhere, even in the most mundane moments, perhaps? How do you describe that access, and where do you find that access, please?
For me, I perceive it more as a question of whether or not my ears and my eyes are turned on. Because when they are, it's everywhere. Not in a way that's a flood or an overwhelm, but if my poet ears are turned on, it can be the most mundane snippet of a phrase of conversation overheard at the grocery line. It's just something will catch me, and it might not come in as profound. It might come in as, oh, that's an interesting set of syllables, or I've never heard that expression before, or I want to write that down because there's something there. And then that particular phrase might pop in months or even years later in some completely different context. So it's more just about when am I paying attention and when am I not? And I know that if there's been a long stretch when I haven't been writing any poetry, it's because my ears have been switched off or they've been focused elsewhere. And if it feels like it's time to turn them back on, things just start arriving. And then the same thing with my eyes. It's just like, am I really noticing? Am I actually stopping and letting that fascination happen? Or am I saying, oh, yet another gorgeous hemlock tree, hello, and then move on?
Yeah, I think going back to the noticing and the paying attention, and I love that phrase, like paying attention, right? Like paying forth your beingness, and that I remember when I went to grad school, poetry school, and I remember the first night of poetry workshop, this tiny little Irish man walked in. His name was James Macaulay, and he recited a Yeats poem with tears streaming down his face. And I thought, oh, what have I gotten myself into? This is so weird. Like my whole academic life had not been anything like that. And I wish I could imitate his voice, but he looked at us, this small group of 14 people in this program, and said, well, you've done it now. You've said that you're going to be poets, which means you will be a raw nerve walking around in the world. And I remember thinking that was sort of a crude way to express it, but I think that, I would agree with Holly that once you've turned up or turned on the awareness, you can't not see it. And I also think that it's particularly human, to be living in a body that has a physical presence in the world with our senses, right? The seeing, the hearing, the smelling, the tasting, the touching, which is, like what E.E. Cummings wrote about. And so to be fully human means I'm experiencing this world as a physical being, but also there's this, this mind and this other realm and that edge of transformation that you're talking about, that I think we're constantly trying to make connections. And so for me, the way I access it is by being as present as I possibly can. So deep listening, paying attention, noticing, slowing down, which is the antithesis to almost everything in our modern world.
So you're describing multiple pathways or portals in the sense of seeing and hearing, in the sense of being a raw nerve, in the sense of paying attention. And it occurs to me that yes, we can discover the poetic through our senses and also through the magnifying capacity of the mind. One of the poetic elements of this world for me is this idea that the atomic structure and the galaxies, they are a reflection of each other. So it says to me that this, even the material world, is organized in some way that rhymes. That there is a certain inner logic that reveals itself through the unfolding of life. When I contemplate, so here is an example, this for me is poetic, even though it's not something I can see with my eyes. When I contemplate the microscopically discovered fact that the small particles of the atom, they can skip or jump or leap from one state to another. And I think that is also true for us humans. Because you are just speaking there, Holly, about turning on or not being turned on in your senses. And in a minute, I'm going to ask, what is it? What is this quality of presence that turns those faculties on? Where for me it rhymes with this appreciation that so the small particles, they can make a leap, and we can make a leap with one invisible thought. That for me is poetic.
I think it's also about a willingness, because I suppose sometimes we might be forced to transform, but I also think there's a willingness, there's a path of willingness and openness in terms of being transformed. And as you were talking, actually, I was, I'm sure all of us on here would probably be self-professed word nerds, right? Like I love looking up words and looking about, where they came from and things like that. And I was writing about and thinking about a transformation in a poem I was writing, and I decided I wanted to look up the word for the thing that happens in the cocoon. And I know that's sometimes a tired metaphor, but the word that I found was holometabolism, which is a complete rearranging of the structure of matter inside that space, so that, what actually emerges is nothing like what went in, and then what happened, and then what came forth from that. And I think that the thing that's really important for me to remember about poetry is it's not an intellectual exercise only. And in fact, I find myself, especially when I use poetry in my work, apologizing for all the terrible English teachers everyone ever had who said, this isn't for you because you're not smart enough. And because I don't believe that. And because it's a human, real, live experience with the body and the mind and the spirit and all the things. So it's completely about transformation.
I absolutely agree. And life is poignant. And if you have the ability to slow down enough to let yourself feel that, in some people it gives rise to music, and some people it gives rise to acts of kindness. It may give rise to dance. It gives rise to some kind of expression of the something of that, which is one of the mysteries of being human. And poetry is one of those attempts to embrace that poignancy and do something with it.